Good afternoon and welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's webinar is providing one free NAB and one free NCAP CEU credit. To be eligible for the CEU credit today, you must stay on the webinar for the full hour. At the end of the webinar, I will provide the required post-webinar survey evaluation link in the webinar room chat box. You will also receive this link to the survey through a constant contact email message. Please be sure to check your spam folder in case it does not go to your inbox. You must fill out this required SurveyMonkey survey evaluation no later than midnight this Thursday, April 25th, to be eligible for your CEU credit. If you are not looking for CEU credit, please go ahead and still fill out the survey as we would like your feedback. The PDF of today's PowerPoint slide deck can be found in the handout section of the webinar room, and CEU certificates will be issued this Friday by the end of the day. Again, please be sure to check your spam folder. And now I will hand the webinar over to Charles D. Vilmorin, the CEO of Link Senior. Charles?
Thanks a lot, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for some of you. It's a pleasure to be on the line with you, and thank you for joining us. I have the great honor and excitement to be doing a few words of introduction before we get into the webinar today of Ashton Applewhite, We Are All Aging, Let's End Ageism. So before we get started into that, we thought it was important to share with you a little bit more about these webinars. So as some of you might be aware, we started them more than a year ago. For the simple reason that we heard from a lot of frontline staff working in senior care, independent living, assisted living, memory care, and nursing homes, that they were very hungry for education about how do we care better for the older adults. And then the other thing also is that for some of them, it became more and more difficult to keep their certification because sometimes they weren't allowed to leave their building or their community to go and get education. So we thought it was a great idea to not only promote best practices, but also really help sometimes the people that need the most help, which is the frontline staff in caring again for the older adults. So far, we've had more than 4,000 participants. We give CEUs that are NCAP and NAB. And then the idea is really to advance resident engagement. We've had fantastic speakers in the past. Some of them are showed here. And I do want to extend an invitation to anyone on the line, is that if you feel there is something that we haven't spoken about or someone that we should invite, please do let us know. The email hdumore@linksenior.com is the best way to do so. Send us any suggestions or comments or people you feel we should invite. At the end of this presentation, we will also share about our upcoming presentations. But please, if you have any ideas, do that. So, I do want to share a little bit about Link Senior because we do sponsor these presentations. Link Senior, as some of you might be aware, provided resident engagement platform for senior care, which is a technology suite of tools to help an activity director, a life enrichment, a rec therapist, or a wellness staff in order to address the needs, preferences, and provide meaningful programs for our residents, especially the ones that live with cognitive impairment and or a dementia like Alzheimer's. We're very excited. We just completed a year-long study where we've shown amazing quality of life, clinical, and financial outcomes with the use of our service. So here on the slide, we now have a third-party research that validates the fact that we can, not only reduce the use of antipsychotics and behaviors associated with dementia, but we can also increase social engagement with the residents of senior care. We can increase cognitive functioning. And the research shows that on a yearly basis, we can help financial savings, financial cost efficiency of more than $22,000 US per location, which is very exciting. So with that, This is the end of just a quick description of being senior. And it's with a fantastic level of excitement, I would say, that I'd like to introduce you to Ashton Applewhite. So Ashton, I met actually at a NIC conference about a year and a half ago. We're very excited to have her. She's an award-winning author and activist, and she's been very active on the field of ageism. Her books include This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism, Cutting Loose, Why Women Who End Their Marriage Do So Well, which Ms. Magazine described as rocket fuel for launching new lives, and Truly Tasted Jokes, which inspired a clue on Jeopardy. She actually blogs on This Chair Rocks. She's the voice behind Yo, Is This Ageist? And she speaks widely at venues that have included the TED main stage and the United Nations. Everyone from the New York Times to NPR and the American Society of Aging considers her as an expert on ageism. Before I give her the floor, I'd like to give you a little bit of context. As some of you might know, this is the first time that we invite someone from outside the senior care industry. And there are three reasons why we decided to do so. One, as a society, we are all facing ageism. The second thing is us professionals working in senior care, because we are in direct contact with the older adult, we are actually exposed much more to ageism. And as some of you might know, because the older adult isn't respected very much, and I'll cite Ashton for that, a society that does not value all people actually doesn't value much the people that work with them. So we thought that it's almost like ageism is probably one of the biggest reasons why we don't have much budget, we don't have much means nor respect in our work. So hopefully this, for some of you, will be a good validation of your thoughts. Some others, it will be a start of a new journey. And with that, I'd like to open the floor to Ashton for her presentation. Ashton, you have the mouse and control.
Thank you, Charles. It's wonderful. When we first met, there was a spark that went off, and it's fantastic to be collaborating with you now. And congratulations on your work. Those data points are impressive. I will say that every data point in the talk that follows is backed up by current science. It is not wishful. It is fact-based, and you will see it has been quite a journey for me too. And I salute you all for the important work you are doing in this important and growing field. So let's start with where it hurts. That scary word to most of us. I don't know about you, but that word used to fill me with apprehension, because it is one thing: we are all going to become older if we're lucky. And my darkest fear, I have to say, was ending up in some grim institutional hallway. Not like one of the wonderful institutions that you work in, where you really care for older people carefully, but for people not in the field, I think, along with Alzheimer's, it is our darkest fear that we will be stuck in some horrible institution and people will have forgotten about us. So remember that I am speaking, directing most of these remarks to the general public, not to people who know as much about the field as you do. So then I learned, when I first started out, very quickly, that the percentage of Americans over 65 in nursing homes is only 2.5%. Nursing homes, not all senior residences. And that number has dropped from 4% just in the decade or so that I've been working on this. And even for people 85 and up, the number is only 9%. What else was I worried about? Dementia, which I think it's now the most feared disease in America. But if you subtract that percentage of people living in nursing homes from the entire population over 65, 90% of the remainder can think just fine. This is not to say that Alzheimer's is not a terrible disease, a huge public health issue. I know you must spend a lot of your time dealing with people with various stages of dementia, but the fact is it is not typical of aging. I think you'll see that I'm not whitewashing the difficult challenges of aging, but we often don't hear the other side of the story, which is that our fears, again, speaking of the general public, tend to be way out of proportion to the reality. For example, you never hear in the general media about the fact that dementia rates are falling significantly. The number of cases is greater because older people make up a greater percentage of the population, but the likelihood of any one of us listening to this, listening to me, getting dementia has gotten lower and lower, and people are getting diagnosed at later ages. I also assumed that old people were depressed because they were old and they were going to die soon. I'm not proud of this now. I think differently now, but I can't tell you how skeptical I was when I started. And then I learned that the longer people live, the less they fear dying, and that people are happiest at the beginnings and the ends of their lives. It's called the U-shaped happiness curve, and it has been borne out by dozens of studies in the US and around the world. And I thought, well, it must be fine if you're rich or fine if you're healthy. But it turns out that you do not need to be a Buddhist or a billionaire. The curve is a function of the way aging itself affects the healthy brain. So slowly, skeptically, gears grinding, my point of view began to change. And I realized that old age was almost certainly going to be different and better, way better than the grim slide into depression, diapers, and puffy white shoes of my nightmares. Although I am still a little worried about the shoes. And that was before I started having to see a podiatrist. And I started obsessing about why so few people know these facts, which are readily available. I learned those things within a few weeks of launching, the statistics I just tossed at you. So the reason is ageism. That's the dictionary definition. We are being ageist anytime we judge a person or a group of people on the basis of how old we think they are. And we experience it anytime someone assumes that we are too old for something, instead of finding out who we are and what we're capable of, or too young. Ageism cuts both ways, right? It's any judgment on the basis of age, and younger people experience a lot of it. All prejudice, ageism, sexism, racism, these are socially constructed ideas, which is just a fancy way of saying we make them up. They change over time, and they serve a social and economic purpose. Prejudice isn't about how we look. It's about how people in power assign meaning to how we look. Underlying all prejudice is stereotyping, the assumption that all members of a group are alike. And of course, stereotypes are always a mistake, but especially when it comes to age, because the longer we live, as decades of unique experience change and shape us, the more different from one another we become. I bet almost everyone listening to this knows this, but it is not something the general public is aware of. And they tend to think of everyone in a retirement home as the same age, which would be old, when they can span 4 decades. And I like to say to them, would you ever think that way about a group of people between age 20 and 60, who are in fact way more homogenous than the people who fill, a senior residence? Pitting young against old, like pitting groups of low-wage workers against each other, or stay-at-home moms against moms in the paid workforce about who's a better mom. This is a time-honored tactic used to divide groups who might otherwise join forces to challenge the status quo. This us or them logic always pops up around healthcare rationing. Listen for it. I bet you hear a lot of it. Why should we spend money on old people when we could spend it on kids? It is not ethical or legal to allocate resources by race or by sex, and weighing the needs of the young against the old is equally unacceptable, period. So I hope the next time that comes up in conversation, or if you're online and someone starts that line of reasoning, nip it in the bud. Say, no, no, no. The entire basis of this conversation is ethically and legally unacceptable. Old versus young ways of thinking also fail the common sense test. Communities that are good to grow old in, which just means they have social services and parks and public transportation, they're good for everyone, right? They're all age friendly. It's not that old people need expensive things. It's that these things make the built environment and the social environment better for all of us. Nobody is born ageist, but it starts in early childhood, around the same time that attitudes towards race and gender start to form, because negative messages about late life come at us from the media and popular culture at every turn. Wrinkles are ugly. Old people are incompetent. It's sad to be old. And older people, like me, I'm 66, can be the most ageist of all because we've had a lifetime of absorbing these messages and never thought to challenge them. And like everyone else, I internalized these prejudices. I had to acknowledge it and stop colluding. That's the uncomfortable bit. Senior moment quips, for example, I finally stopped making them when it dawned on me that when I lost the car keys in high school, I didn't call it a junior moment, right? Kids forget things all the time. Like I stopped blaming my sore knee on being 66 because my other knee feels fine and it's just as old. So that's something you can do is think about, do you automatically blame an ache or a pain on age when it might have to do with having cooked dinner for a bunch of people, or taking a long walk? Do you ever grouse about entitled millennials? When you get to a party, do you make a beeline for people your own age? Have you ever rejected an outfit or a relationship or a haircut because it's not age appropriate? For adults, there is no such thing as age appropriate. All these behaviors are ageist. We all do them, no judgment, but we can't challenge age bias unless we're aware of it. And that is not easy, and it's uncomfortable. You can tie a baby elephant up with a rope. It soon learns it can't get away. And the same rope will do the job when the elephant is the size of a Volkswagen. And that rope pulls tighter over time. Excuse me. As age-related stereotypes grow more relevant, right, as we get older, we tend to act as though they're accurate, and that creates self-fulfilling prophecies. You might think of it in a clinical situation as learned helplessness. Unless we challenge the underlying message that to age is to lose value as a human being, it's that basic and that ugly, it becomes part of our identity. That is internalized ageism, and that is why, like the elephant, so many of us collude in our own disempowerment and stay tethered. And I was one of them. I had to acknowledge and start letting go of the prejudices that had been drummed into me since childhood. And what was the hardest one to let go of? The one against myself, my own future older self. All prejudice relies on othering, seeing a group of people as other than ourselves, whether other color, other nationality, other religion. And the strange thing about ageism is that this other is us, our own future older selves. This is not an idea original to me. It's an idea that everyone who thinks about ageism arrives at. And ageism feeds in denial, gets its source, its starting point in our reluctance to acknowledge that we're going to become that older person. It is denial when we refer to older people as them instead of us, even if we rounded the third turn on the track. It's denial when we believe in anti-aging products or get offended when someone politely offers us a seat on the bus. It is denial when we feel like our bodies are betraying us simply because they're changing over time. And age denial blinds us to our own bias, and it perpetuates it in 1,000 ways. It is not having a vagina that makes life harder for women. It's sexism. It's not loving a man that makes life harder for gay guys. It's homophobia. And it is not the passage of time that makes aging so much harder than it should be. It is ageism. When labels are hard to read, or there's no handrail, or we can't open the damn jar, we tend to blame ourselves, our failure to age successfully, instead of blaming the ageism that makes these natural transitions shameful and the discrimination that makes these barriers acceptable. When we dye our hair just to cover the gray, or conceal our age, or leave early accomplishments off our resumes, we reinforce age shame. These are really successful strategies. I completely understand why so many of us do these things. No judgment, I swear, right? We each have to navigate these passages in our own way and in our own time. But these behaviors are like a gay person trying to pass for straight, or a person of color trying to pass for white. They're not good for us because they're rooted in shame about something that shouldn't be shameful. Why should it be shameful to wake up a day older? And they give a pass to the underlying discrimination that makes these behaviors necessary. And for people who face other kinds of discrimination, like lesbians and people of color, the costs are even higher. It drives me nuts when some clown calls me young lady and expects me to feel complimented, but I didn't know why until I started thinking deeply about it. Because it's embarrassing to be called out as older until we quit being embarrassed about it. Why on earth do we stop celebrating the ability to adapt and grow as we move through life? Why should aging well mean struggling to look and move like younger versions of ourselves? Everyone wakes up a day older. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we move from denial to acceptance and maybe even all the way to embrace, the better off we'll be. And the younger it happens, the better off we are, right? That's when we overthrow what geriatrician Bill Thomas calls the tyranny of still, the delusion that as long as we're still running, still dating younger women, still working, still driving at night, we all have our stills. It's deeply human, but that we could somehow stop the clock, as if that would be possible and as if it would be a good thing. Aging is not a problem to be fixed or a disease to be cured. It is a powerful, natural, lifelong process that unites us all. You can't make money off satisfaction, but shame and fear create markets. And capitalism always needs new markets. Who says wrinkles are ugly? The multi-billion-dollar anti-aging segment of the skincare industry. Who says perimenopause and low T and mild cognitive impairment are medical conditions? The trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry. What a market, right? Because everyone is going to come down with it. And the more clearly we see these forces at work, the easier it is to envision alternative, more positive, more accurate narratives, right? This is what the data tells us. And the longer we wait, the more damage it does. More and more people like me are expanding the definition of working age, both because we want to and because we have to. There is an awful lot of people in their 60s and 70s who have way too little in savings to retire comfortably, partly because of the Great Recession, partly because very few people can rely on pensions anymore. And yet age discrimination in the workforce is rampant. The personal and economic consequences are devastating. Engineers in Silicon Valley are getting Botoxed and hair plugged before key interviews. And these are skilled white men in their 30s. So imagine the effects further down the food chain. An information society, which is what we are becoming, demands the deep knowledge base of older workers. Experience is an asset, not a liability, right? It's sort of even nutty to have to say that out loud. I just read a blog post, and it was called Tech Blog, which said most people, when they apply for a job, are worried about having too little experience, but not in tech, or having too much can be a problem, which tells you something is wrong. And of course, we all know that diverse workplaces aren't just better places to work, they work better, it's more profitable. And just like race and gender, age is a criterion for diversity. Ageism in medicine means less treatment, worse treatment, and often no treatment at all. If your doctor says at your age, what do you expect? It's time for a new doctor. We now understand that much change that was once thought to be irreversible and biologically based has a lot more to do with how people perceive their futures. Yet physicians and their patients, right? A lot of us are complicit in this. Write off old age ailments all the time. You know, that's just the way it is. Doctors tend to spend more time with younger patients and are more open to their concerns, even though younger people have fewer medical issues. And here again is a really basic question. Why should we accept a different standard of care for older people, right? We don't accept it in any other domain. So ask that question just flat out when it crops up. That is institutional ageism at work. Internalized ageism matters too, a lot. A growing body of fascinating research shows that attitudes towards aging have an actual measurable effect on how our minds and bodies function. People with more positive feelings, which really just means more accurate feelings, right? Walk faster, heal quicker, live longer, as much as 7.5 years longer on average. And age denial, on the other hand, keeps lots of people from making the lifestyle choices that pay off in the long run. That's why the World Health Organization, like World Health Organization, not World Old People Organization, is developing a global anti-ageism campaign to extend not just lifespan, but health span. Sadly, there is no evidence that Sudoku or brain training protect us against cognitive decline, but study after study show that attitudes towards aging matter a lot. People who associate old age with growth and purpose are less likely to develop dementia, even if they are genetically predisposed to the disease. And let me say again, you can find all the data. My website is thischairrocks.com/blog, click on the word blog, you'll see a search field. You can look up dementia, you'll find all the research behind it, or you'll find it in my book. The idea is that positive beliefs about aging help keep us healthy by buffering stress and prejudice, the effects of ageism. Equating aging with disease and decrepitude, on the other hand, makes us more vulnerable to exactly those things. We also know that some people whose brains were full of Alzheimer's type plaque stayed sharp to the end, and you know what they had in common? A sense of purpose. And I like to point out, purpose doesn't have to be to cure cancer or end ageism. It can be to see your grandchild graduate from college. You know, it can be to plant your begonias in the spring. And what is the biggest obstacle to having a sense of purpose in late life? A culture that tells us that getting older means shuffling off stage. Women face the double whammy of ageism and sexism, so we experience aging differently. We are less likely to be able to afford a decent retirement than men because we earn less, are penalized for time spent out of the workforce, typically spent on unpaid caregiving, and because we live longer. There's a double standard at work here, shocker, the notion that aging enhances men and devalues women. And women reinforce this double standard when we compete to stay young, another punishing and losing proposition. When we rank other women by age, we reinforce ageism, sexism, lookism, the idea that, of course, the most important thing about us is how we look, and patriarchy. You do not need a PhD in women's studies to know this is not good for us. It's expensive, right? A lot of people can't even afford these remedies. It sets us up to fail. No one can stop the clock. And again, it pits women against each other. And this discrimination, this crippling intersection of sexism and ageism affects women's health, our income, and our well-being. The effects add up over time and are further compounded by race and class, and that is why the poorest of the poor all around the world are old women of color. I bet you know a thing or two about elder abuse. Here's a quote from Dr. Robert Butler, who coined the term ageism in 1969. Quote, ageism allows the younger generations to see older people as different than themselves. Thus, they subtly cease to identify with their elders as human beings, unquote. That is one reason 5 out of 6 incidents of elder abuse go unreported. Because when we see a group as other than ourselves, their basic human rights seem less important. Unlike domestic violence or child abuse, we don't talk about elder abuse much, and neither do many victims who are embarrassed by their vulnerability, ashamed to ask for help, and think they may not deserve it, worst of all. That is internalized ageism at work, reinforcing structural discrimination. Lots of us hope to have some control over how and when we die. And the best way to achieve that is to talk about what we think we'll want, ideally well ahead of time and ideally on an ongoing basis. Because I've learned, you know, I used to be super smug. I've got my papers all in place. And then I realized I'm not sure what I'm going to want at the end. But pretending we're not getting any older, not to mention pretending we're not going to die, makes those conversations a lot less likely. And it also leads us to squander resources on costly but ineffective tests and treatments, especially toward the end. The flip side of the coin, and there's always a flip side of the coin, is that an ageist society casts the end-of-life problem, that's in quotes, in terms of growing numbers of old people who inconveniently refuse to die, when the underlying issue is the changing nature of healthcare, right? Healthcare costs are not growing in with the percentage of older people in the population. That's a common myth. It's the use of technology that's driving healthcare costs up. It has become commonplace to hear healthy, middle-aged people wondering whether the ethical alternative to living too long will be to commit suicide, not because they're broke or sick or ended up alone, but just because they got old. That is internalized ageism of the deadliest sort. At any age and in any condition, a person has the right to want to stay alive. Feeling alienated from older people is not natural or inevitable, and feeling apprehensive about becoming like us, those feelings are the result of social forces, ageism, sexism, and capitalism, which we can change. Age segregation impoverishes us all because it cuts us off from most of humanity, especially in the US, where remarkably few people have a friend, described as someone you would talk to about a close, personal matter, that is more than 10 years older or younger than them, and that's not even half a generation. And of course, discrimination encourages segregation and isolation, which you all know is the biggest threat to an active and happy old age. We have an amazing opportunity at this point in history. For those of us with access to healthcare and education, 4 and even 5 living generations are becoming commonplace. We're going to have more time to figure out what we want to do with our lives, and more time to accomplish it and share what we know, and more time to wind down with the people we love. To take advantage of this longevity dividend, is what some people call it, we need to quit the reflexive hand-wringing, challenge the ageist assumptions that underlie it, and think realistically and imaginatively about how to shape the multi-generational society that we all want to live long enough to inhabit. It's going to take all hands and on deck and all ages. If you look at this map of the world, what's the takeaway? Our world is growing older fast. By 2050, 1 in 5 people worldwide, almost 2 billion of us, will be over age 60. And longer lives are, of course, a fundamental hallmark of human progress. It correlates, I mean, it's a fantastic achievement of public health. It correlates with higher education, with less warfare, with reproductive rights for women. So, you know, it's crazy that we do anything other than celebrate this achievement. And of course, all these older people, you know, represent a vast, unprecedented, and untapped resource. You know, it's new, right? We haven't quite figured out what to do with these longer lives. And yet, shamefully, despite this amazing achievement, in a historical reversal, the lifespans of the least educated Americans are actually contracting in the wealthiest country in the world. Capitalism and urbanization have propelled age bias into every corner of the globe, from Switzerland, where olders fare the best, to Afghanistan, which sits at the bottom of the Global Age Watch Index, which is where I got this map from, put together by Help Age International, which is a great organization you may know about. Over half of the world's 195 countries had to be left off their list because we don't bother to collect data on millions and millions of people just because they are no longer young. Almost 2/3 of people over age 60 around the world find it hard to get health care. Almost 3/4 say they have trouble paying for basic services like water, electricity, food, and decent housing. Is this the world we want our children, many of whom will live to be 100, to inherit? Here's the thing, this longevity is new. The rules and institutions around us were created when lives were shorter, and they have yet to catch up. And that gives us a critical window of opportunity to shape a world that supports people of all ages, right? These solutions have to work for younger people too, because they have to be sustainable, and because what we want is a world of age equity, right? That supports people all across the lifespan. So how do we get there? First step, tap into what we know. Aging enriches us. Growing older isn't just different from what we've been brainwashed to believe, it's way better. Again, it is not that the losses aren't real. It's that we only hear one side of the story. Aging brings authenticity, confidence, perspective, self-awareness. It's easier to manage emotions. We care less about what people think, which is really liberating, especially for women. We want less. That is why I have never met anyone who actually wants to go back to their youth. You can't just swap out the battered bits, because we know, no matter how apprehensive we are, that our years are what make us us. Look more generously at each other and at ourselves. Entire industries are built on convincing younger people that my 66-year-old body is hideous, that old equals ugly, especially for women. But a system designed to exploit our insecurities can only do so if we agree to it. Instead of muttering, "What the hell happened?" at the face in the mirror, which we all do, no judgment, how about taking a minute to recall some of the things that did happen and how remarkable they were, right? How about refusing to buy this idea of the beauty industry, that our wrinkles are ugly? They tell the story of our lives. Let's not delude ourselves. This is the work of a lifetime. We need to embark on it with others and across generations, but none of this stigma about old equaling ugly is natural. None of it is fixed, and change is underway. 2 years ago, for example, Allure magazine banned the term anti-aging from its pages, commending instead, quote, "the long-awaited, utterly necessary celebration of growing into your own skin, wrinkles and all." If this mainstay of the beauty industry can do it, so can we. Insist on being seen and valued as our full, rich, lumpy, complicated selves and taking that change out into the world. This one is really important. Ask for help. I know you all are helping people all day long. I was at a conference once where they asked who likes to help people, and everyone raised their hand. Who likes to be helped? No one raises their hand. But you know, we all know that these are two-way transactions, right? Helping makes people feel good. I tell the story about moving to a neighborhood in Brooklyn where almost everyone is young, and how I had to force myself to ask for help with my suitcase when I went down the subway stairs. And kids hoist my suitcase like it's a lunchbox, and they reward me with a smile, and they feel good, and I feel good too. In India, where the vast majority of older people live with their families, there is nothing demeaning about receiving care and support of all kinds, including with toileting. Imagine that. Of course, the terms and power dynamics are going to shift, but autonomy requires collaborators. I want to take the word independence out of this entire discourse, knock it off the pedestal, and substitute interdependence, because all of life is interdependence. Let's acknowledge the need for helping hands, all lifelong, right? And reach for them gratefully and without shame. And to make friends of all ages. The most important component of a happy old age, as you know, is having a solid social network. And these tend to shrink over time, right? Because we leave the work, people we've known all our lives die. And that's why it's so important for olders to make younger friends. If you don't know people much older or younger than you, think of something you like to do. Could be listening to music, could be reading, could be bird watching, and find a mixed age group to do it with. Don't stay home just because you'll stick out. And that is how social change happens, slowly, slowly. And of course, younger people benefit too, because otherwise each generation has to figure out on its own just how dumb and destructive it is to fear getting older, and how much of our youth we waste on worrying about it. And lastly, join forces. Dismantling ageism is going to take nothing less than a mass movement like the 20th century one that catalyzed a mass shift of consciousness for women around the world. And what happened during the women's movement was that women came together and shared stories and realized that what they had been thinking of as personal problems, like not getting hurt or getting harassed, were actually widely shared political problems that required collective action. And there's a term for that shift in awareness that I learned recently: cognitive liberation, which I love because it speaks to like the nerdy part of me and the activist. And it describes the process of becoming aware of discrimination and then realizing we're not stuck with second-class status as just the way it is, and realize that we can come together and do something about it. Cognitive liberation is a fantastic feeling, and it is the linchpin of movement building. Changing the culture is a tall order, but culture is fluid. Look at how much momentum Me Too has achieved and how much progress we've made on gay rights and trans rights. Look at gender, which we used to think of until pretty recently, most of us as a binary, male and female. And now we understand as a spectrum. It is high time to ditch the old-young binary too. There's no line in the sand between old and young, after which it's all downhill. And that imaginary threshold segregates us and fills us with dread. And that dread makes us stupid, and pits us against each other. Until we put a stop to it, ageism will oppress us all. And that makes it a perfect target for collective advocacy and a unifying cause. Why add another ism to the list when so many, racism in particular, call out for action? Here's the thing: you don't have to choose. When we make the world a better place to grow old in, we make it a better place in which to be from somewhere else, to have a disability, to be queer, to be non-rich, non-white. And when we show up at all ages for whatever cause we believe in, save the whales, the clinic, the median strip, the democracy, it's a long list, we not only make that effort more effective, just by showing up at all ages, we dismantle ageism in the process, right? And we make those friends who are different from us. And then younger people become less apprehensive about getting older, and older people become more generous to younger people, and we form lifelong friendships. Longevity is here to stay. A movement to end ageism is underway. I'm in it, and I hope you will join me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ashton. This was, as always, truly inspiring. I'd like to come back to our presentation here and maybe take the time to ask you a few questions. So we've had a number of questions on the chat of the GoToWebinar. I'd like to take the time to mention the fact that if anyone has questions, now's the time to drop them in the question box of the GoToWebinar screen. One of the first questions we got, Ashton, was, based on your experience talking to so many people at different levels in our society or different areas, who's the most ageist, or where do you see the most ageism happen today?
I have to say, I think it is among older people, which was very surprising to me when I first thought it. I thought, it would be like a person of color being racist, and and everyone is prejudiced, but why would we not be the most liberated? But because we have had a lifetime of these messages, very few of us have thought to question them. And because we can't challenge bias unless we're aware of it, the very first step is to look inside at your own attitudes towards age and aging. And that process is uncomfortable. It's like the elephant going, oh crap, here I am being, tied up by a piece of dental floss. What's wrong with me? And that is uncomfortable. I remember thinking that people in aging services would be thrilled to get the memo. I was incredibly naive. I had no training, no background. But it is often when you deal with people who are at the most debilitated end of the spectrum, I think it's of course easy to forget the spectrum of aging for everyone. And it's easy, I think, for your professional identity to be bound up in this idea that you are there to help people who are incapacitated, which is incredibly important, enriching, undervalued work, but it's only part of the picture. And I think it's really hard to reconcile that view of aging, which, let's be honest, some of these people embody our darkest fears about our own aging. And it's a really big job to reconcile that aspect of aging, which does await some of us, with a more balanced idea of aging across the life course and across the population as a whole. It's very easy to get sort of swamped by that very negative single lens view of aging and oldness.
Interesting. I think Megan has fielded a few other questions. I'll let her take over the questions.
Yes, Ashton, one person would like to know more about your new website, Old School, and what kind of resources they would be able to find there.
Oh, great. Old School, I wish I came up with a name, but I didn't. It was one of my two collaborators. The website is oldschool.info. We figured that movements need tools. And so it is quite simply a database, a clearinghouse of anti-ageism resources of all types. You can find books, you can find workshops, you can find PowerPoints, you can find blogs. If you want to learn more about ageism, or if you want to ideally, take it out into the world and teach people about it, you can find, I think, pretty much the best of what's out there. And I'm happy to say people are sending us new stuff all the time. If you make something, we'd love to review it and put it up there if it is explicitly about either explaining ageism or dismantling ageism or both. And it's just tons. Everything up there is available for a free download. Public speakers as well. Just since we launched it 9 months ago, we've added a couple new sections, podcasts, and one on campaigns. And if you want evidence that a movement against ageism is underway worldwide, go to the campaign section and you can see the way other organizations, Australia, for example, launched a national anti-ageism campaign in October. And so did, there was a trans-European program. So, use that stuff. Credit it when you can, appropriate it if you just want to use it. It's all there just for you for free.
Thanks, Ashton. We also have a question about your book and your recent book tour. This individual is wondering what you heard most often while you were on the road talking about the new book.
What was exciting for me is that I've been at this for over 10 years now, and in the beginning, I really felt like I had to say to people, this is what ageism is, and here's why it's important. This time around, people were saying to me, how can I be anti-ageist in what I do, whether I'm an architect or, or a gerontology student, or, in any, people were talking about, or an activist or in workforce training, how can I bring an awareness of ageism to my field? So people are starting to be tactical with their knowledge, which is really exciting. I would say if I had to pick a question or a person who was there at every representative at all of the many appearances, who had to, sort of be representative of the group of a whole, it would be a person probably in their 50s who was laid off and has sent out hundreds of resumes and is unable to find work. Ageism in the workforce is a tremendous problem. It is often the first time that white men encounter discrimination. So I'm counting on some of those guys to get woke and join the movement. And I think it is an area where we are going to see a lot of people are definitely doing more research. There was a ProPublica story at the end of the year that showed that over half of workers, American workers over 50, are forced out of work. They're not necessarily, have the door slammed on them, but one way or another, they are made to leave jobs not of their own volition. And if we older people can't support ourselves, who's going to take care of us, right? We know that age discrimination at work costs companies, not just ideologically, but financially. So I think there's going to be real pushback against ageism in the workforce. It's starting to happen. And I think that's going to be one of the places where we see measurable culture change soonest.
Thank you, Ashton. Another question that just came in is just the thought that combating ageism can feel overwhelming. Are there suggestions you have for how someone can do this in their daily routine?
That is a great question. Yeah, it can feel overwhelming. But if you, and I do have a bunch of suggestions. And again, and there are a lot in the book. Start by looking at the way you use the words old and young, because that shines a little light on how you think, of course, about aging. We hear people say, I bet you hear it, I don't feel old. And what people really mean is I don't feel useless or ugly or incapacitated or incompetent. And I don't know about you, but I felt all those things more keenly when I was 13 than I have ever felt since. Those feelings are not a function of our chronological age, nor when people say I feel young, what they mean, is typically I feel sexy, I feel energetic, I feel healthy. We can feel those things at any age. So decouple, try to avoid, using language like young at heart. When what that really means is not, lots of, if that means happy or energetic, again, we can feel that at any time. And think about how you feel about saying your age. And if you're, and again, no judgment. I gave a talk once in Beverly Hills, and I was talking to the moderator beforehand about how to handle the Q&A, and she said, and I said, well, we could ask people to say their ages when they ask a question. And she said, honey, this is Beverly Hills. We need ambulances lined up out front. So, no judgment about how we do any of this, but think about, if you do, hide your age, what is the cost to it to yourself, and think about maybe chipping away at it a little by little, because we can't challenge this stuff unless we're aware of it, and we are all prejudiced. And even if you just change one little thing, even if you are on the receiving end of an ageist comment, really good all-purpose comeback is, why would you say that? Are you still working? Why would you say that? Right? Why would you call me young lady? Not in a snarky gotcha kind of way, but the ideal is to ask the person, to force the person, let's be honest, this stuff is uncomfortable, to think about why something they said is actually not okay. And you can, if you come across something and you wonder whether it's ageist, you can send it into Yo, is this ageist? That's my question and answer blog. And that's another, teaching and education tool if you want to take a look at it. I try to be funny. I try to be accurate, and it's hard because it's really an ethics column. These are new ideas to a lot of people. And sometimes we don't know whether something is ageist. A good litmus test, if the same comment or behavior on the basis of race or sex wouldn't pass muster, probably ageist, probably not okay. But once you start seeing this stuff, you'll see it everywhere. And paradoxically, that is liberating, because that's the cognitive liberation piece. Once you say, oh, it's not me, it's not my fault that somehow I allowed myself to get wrinkles, I allowed myself to get arthritis, so I can't open the damn jar. They should make a jar that is easy to open, right? It's not your fault. We are not individually to blame. This is a social problem that requires collective action.
Thanks so much, Ashton. Another question that just came in is about ageism and its connection to public health. Can you explore that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, that's, no matter whether you love old people or hate old people, no matter where you are, politically, ideologically, no one wants older people to be sick, and no one wants older people to be expensive. So I think we have cultural forces that, as I mentioned, are going to work against age discrimination in the workplace so that older people can remain financially as self-sufficient as possible for as long as possible. And I think another really critical point, and I hope some of you work in public health or know people who do, because please push it up the food chain, is an anti-ageism campaign as a public health initiative, right? Because of all this evidence, and there's more and more of it, a lot of it is coming out of Yale University, conducted by a woman named Becca Levy. You can find her on oldschool.info and look at her research in detail, that shows that attitudes towards aging have a measurable physical effect. And these data points that I started to talk with are easy to find. And sort of the fun part about these ideas being so new to people and so unexamined is that there are just a ton of light bulb moments, and that makes educating people about it fun, because so many of these ideas are just hidden in plain sight. And the minute you wake people up to them, they go like, duh, why didn't I think of that? Or why was I so afraid? So anti-ageism campaign as a public health initiative, that's which the World Health Organization is doing, but it's slow, they're underfunded, and cultures are very specific. So it would be great to have one that addresses American popular culture and ways of life in particular.
Absolutely. Another question that came in, Ashton, is you don't hear too often about the importance of intergenerational collaboration when it comes to combating ageism. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, I think that's changing. I have been very, very heartened by all the intergenerational initiatives springing up all over the place around the workforce, partly because workplaces do have, 2, 3, even 4 generations. The built environment, there are a lot of older people, for example, in big old houses with extra room in them, and younger people who can't afford to buy their own houses yet. Or baby boomers who want to age in community, developing all age communities. So I see these initiatives popping up all over, and although they are not explicitly designed to end ageism, as I referenced at the end of my talk, they are inherently anti-ageist. Just like if you have people of all different races and ethnicities at the table, it's a lot harder to be racist. We all gravitate toward people who look like us, but when we break out of that mold, it's very hard to hang on to old-fashioned ideas and prejudices. So I'm very excited at all the intergenerational initiatives coming up all over. I think it's a better way to to live. It's the best way to counteract the isolation of old age.
Definitely. And last here, Ashton, where can people find your book if they're interested in reading that?
I'm happy to say it was published March 5th by a new division of Macmillan. So it is in bookstores everywhere in hardcover. You can also find it in every electronic version in Kindle and Nook and all of those. And it's available in an audio edition on audible.com, read by me. And also, if you're on social media, I have a very active This Chair Rocks Facebook page. And I've become a big fan of Twitter, which is something I really didn't think I would ever say 5 years ago when I forced myself onto it. It's pretty interesting out there, and Instagram too. So it's easy to find me. If you go to thischairrocks.com, there is a you can sign up for my email. I will never give your email away, and I won't get it together to write you very often, as Charles can testify. I am in the process of working one up, an email about sort of 5 things that I learned on my tour. I'll give you a sneak preview of one. So sign up for my mailing list if you want to see how the revolution is coming. What's the best answer to how old are you? Say, I was born in 1952, which I was. And no one can do the math, so they spaz. But you have answered the question honestly and straightforwardly. And the person who asked the question is sort of forced, if you will, to acknowledge, wow, this person has been around for a long time without the negative connotations that an ageist culture puts on an older age. So that's my parting gift to you.
Thanks so much, Ashton.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
so much for everything. It's been wonderful having you today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, in the last 5 minutes, I invite you to again join Ashton and her movement, because it is now a very large movement on these different social media, her website, different platforms. I do want to mention the fact that when I met Ashton, one of the first comments she had for me was about the Old People Are Cool campaign that Link Senior started 2 years ago. And Ashton is right. There's something wrong about this message, which is that ultimately everyone is cool, right? It's not only old people. As you know, this campaign we started 2 years ago, and despite the fact that it's not perfect, as Ashton mentioned, it's been a great way for us, Link Senior, to give back, to start discussions about anti-ageism. And I want also to say that one of the greatest comments we had was people working in senior care, caregivers, frontline people, saying that they would use these stickers or participate in the conversation, and people around them would say, oh, you are proud of your work, aren't you? And so, you know, coming back full circle to the quote of Ashton, when she says that in a society that doesn't value old people, we don't really value people that work for them. You know, again, this is, as many other resources, including Ashton, a way to at least have a conversation around age and push back on anti-ageism. With that, I'd love to share with you a little bit about our upcoming webinars and focus on one that is a great segue from today's webinar, which is the one that we will have next month on May 21st on 1 p.m. Eastern. And this is, we'll have Tracy Gendron from the Virginia Commonwealth University, which actually works and knows Ashton. And the idea would be to continue this discussion about anti-ageism and how can we apply it to senior care. So basically the title will be Ageism, Turning Knowledge into Action Confirmation. And the idea is that she'll be telling us how we can implement some of Ashton and some of the anti-ageism ideas and learn more about her work. With that, I'll leave it up to Megan to cover a few last administrative details.
Thank you for joining us today. I just want everyone to know that the mandatory survey evaluation link for CEU credit is now in the chat box in the webinar room. If you're unable to use it there, I will be sending it this afternoon via constant contact email message. Please do check your spam box if you don't see it in your primary email inbox. In that email, I'll include a recording from today's webinar along with the 2 handouts as PDF documents, and a save the date with the registration information for the webinar next month with Dr. Tracy Gendron on May 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, have a great afternoon, and we will talk to you next month. Thank you again, Ashton.
You're welcome.